The cruel gift the room was filled with cruel laughter. Alien overlords sat around in a wide circle, their strange eyes glowing in the dim light. They had gathered for entertainment, and tonight their amusement came at the expense of one human. His name was Ethan, a soldier who had once fought bravely, but now stood alone as a prisoner among enemies. The aliens wanted to humiliate him. They whispered and sneered, mocking the strength that humans once claimed to have. Then, with dramatic flair, their leader stepped forward. In his arms, he carried a figure wrapped in rags. When the cloth fell, a small alien girl was revealed. She was weak. Her skin was pale and bruised, her body trembling with fear. Her arms were thin, her eyes wide with terror, and her lips cracked from thirst. She looked like a broken doll, discarded and forgotten. The leader grinned, his sharp teeth glinting. "Here, human," he said with mock kindness, "a gift for you. A toy. Something to keep you busy." The crowd roared with laughter. Some slammed their claws against the metal floor. Others shouted cruel words, daring Ethan to show his true animal nature. The girl was shoved toward him. She stumbled and fell at his feet, too weak to stand. She looked up, her eyes filled with fear and hopelessness. She had seen enough cruelty to know what was expected. She braced herself for pain, but Ethan did not move. He stood still, staring down at her. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard, but behind them was not cruelty. 'Twas something else, something the aliens did not understand. The overlords waited. One shouted, "Break her. Show us your true self, human." Another hissed, "She is nothing. Use her, hurt her, throw her away." But Ethan knelt instead. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand. The girl flinched, closing her eyes, expecting a strike, but no strike came. His hand hovered near, steady, patient. When she opened her eyes, she saw no anger there, only quiet strength. The aliens grew restless. Their laughter turned to confusion. "What are you doing?" one barked. "She is a toy, nothing more." Ethan ignored them. He placed his hand gently on the girl's shoulder and helped her sit up. His touch was careful, almost protective. The girl trembled, not understanding why he was helping her. She whispered something in her weak voice, words that only he could hear. He didn't understand her language, but he understood the fear in her tone. He shook his head and spoke softly. "No one will hurt you." The aliens hissed in anger. This was not the reaction they wanted. They wanted cruelty, violence, proof that humans were beasts. Instead, they saw defiance in the form of compassion. The leader's grin faded into a scowl. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You disappoint us, human. Do you think kindness will save you? Do you think it will save? Her weakness is death." Ethan looked up, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. His voice was calm, but filled with steel. "Then, I'll take weakness." The aliens roared in fury, but something shifted in the room. The girl, still trembling in his arms, looked at him with new eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt something other than fear. She felt the faint spark of hope. Ethan lifted her carefully, holding her against his chest. She was light, too light, as though life had nearly left her already. He carried her as though she were not a toy, but something precious. The crowd shouted louder, mocking him, spitting insults. But Ethan no longer heard them. His world had narrowed to the fragile being in his arms. In that moment, a silent vow formed inside him. He had been given a cruel gift meant to break his spirit. Instead, it had awakened something long buried. Soldiers resolved not to harm, but to protect. The aliens didn't know it yet, but their joke had just planted the seed of defiance. What they thought was entertainment would soon become rebellion. As the laughter echoed around him, "Ethan, walked out with the girl in his arms. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The path ahead was already clear. He would protect her, no matter the cost. Asterisk the girl's condition. The door to Ethan's small quarters closed behind him with a dull thud, shutting out the echo of alien laughter. For the first time since she had been shoved into his hands, the alien girl was away from the cruel stares of the crowd. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a single lamp. The air smelled of iron and dust, but it was warmer than the cold corridors outside. Ethan gently set her down on a simple cot in the corner. The girl flinched at his touch, curling into herself as if she expected more pain. Her thin arms wrapped around her knees, her fragile body trembling. He crouched down beside her, keeping his movements slow, deliberate, non-threatening. "You're safe here," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure she understood his words. His tone mattered more than the language. The girl's wide eyes darted around the room, scanning everything with suspicion. She had learned not to trust anyone. Every flicker of movement, every sound made her tense. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but only a soft, broken sound escaped. Ethan studied her carefully. Up close, he could see the extent of her suffering. Her skin bore marks of old wounds, faint scars that spoke of cruelty over time. Fresh bruises covered her arms, and her wrists carried red marks where restraints had once cut deep. Her clothing was torn, no more than rags clinging to her small frame. She looked as though she had been treated as less than nothing. A knot formed in his chest. He had seen war, seen men and women broken on battlefields, but something about her conditions struck deeper. She was not a soldier. She had not chosen to fight. She was just a child, someone who had been forced to carry scars of cruelty she had never asked for. Ethan rose slowly and fetched a flask of water from the table. He poured some into a tin cup, then crouched again, holding it out to her. Girl's eyes narrowed in fear. She hesitated, glancing at him, then at the cup. "It's water," he said softly, raising it to his own lips and taking a sip to show her. Then he offered it again. After a long pause, she reached out with trembling hands and took the cup. Her fingers shook so badly that a few drops spilled, but she lifted it to her lips and drank. The sound of her swallowing echoed in the small room, and when the cup was empty, she clutched it tightly to her chest as if afraid it would be taken away. Ethan gave a faint nod. "Good," he murmured. Next, he pulled out a piece of bread, the last of his ration. He broke it in half, keeping one piece for himself, and held the other out to her. She stared at it, hesitant again. Hunger fought against mistrust in her eyes. Finally, she reached out and snatched it from his hand, biting into it with desperate speed. Crumbs fell to the floor, but she didn't stop until the piece was gone. Ethan watched silently, his heart heavy. No one should ever eat like that, not unless they had been starving for far too long. When she finished, her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. For the first time, she looked at him not with pure fear, but with a flicker of curiosity. Ethan leaned back, giving her space. He didn't speak. Instead, he let the silence grow comfortable, hoping she would feel safe enough to rest. Minutes passed, and slowly, the girl's breathing steadied. She curled on the cot, clutching the blanket he had pulled over her, and closed her eyes. Sleep came uneasily, but it came. Ethan sat in the chair nearby, watching over her. His thoughts were restless. Why had they given her to him? To humiliate him? To test him? Whatever their reason, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she was here, broken and afraid. And somehow he was the only barrier between her and the cruelty of the world outside. As she slept, he noticed details he had missed before. The way her lips moved slightly, whispering words in her native tongue, even in dreams. the way her small body tensed at every sound, as if expecting danger even in sleep. She had lived too long in fear. A spark of anger flared in him, not at her, but at those who had done this to her. They had treated her like a toy, something to be thrown away. But she was not a toy. She was alive. She was someone who still clung to life despite everything. And in that moment, Ethan made a quiet decision. He would not let her suffer again. Hours later, the girl stirred awake. She blinked, disoriented, then looked around the room with wary eyes. When she saw Ethan still there, still watching quietly, she froze. He raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. "It's all right," he said gently. "No one will hurt you here." She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand his tone more than his words. Then, with a shaky breath, she whispered something in her own language. The sound was fragile, almost broken, but it carried a question. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone asking, "Why are you being kind to me?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he pulled the blanket higher over her shoulders and gave a simple nod. For a long moment, the girl stared at him. Then, slowly, she rested her head back on the cot. Her eyes closed again, but this time, she did not tremble as much. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his own eyes heavy with exhaustion. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He could not return her to those who had hurt her. She had been given to him as a cruel joke, a toy to break his spirit. But she was not a toy. She was someone who deserved protection. And as he sat in the silence of his quarters, Ethan knew he had already taken the first step. Down a path he could not turn away from. Asterisk. Whispers of compassion the next morning came with an uneasy quiet. The alien girl still slept on the cot, curled under the blanket Ethan had given her. Her breathing was shallow, but steadier than the night before. Ethan moved quietly around the room, trying not to wake her as he prepared a small ration of food. He wasn't sure if she trusted him yet, but trust didn't matter. She needed care, and he would give it. When she finally stirred, her eyes blinked open with the same fear as yesterday. But this time, when Ethan handed her a piece of bread, she took it without hesitation. That tiny gesture, acceptance instead of resistance, was progress. Ethan allowed himself a faint exhale. He didn't smile, but inside he felt the shift. A barrier had cracked, but outside his door, the world was already changing. In the corridors of the alien stronghold, whispers began to spread. At first, it was only small comments, guards chuckling about the human who refused to play their game. "Did you hear? He's treating the girl like she matters," one sneered. Another laughed. "The human is weak. Too soft. He doesn't even know how to enjoy a gift." Yet not all the voices were mocking. Some were curious, others even sounded unsettled. "He didn't hurt her," one asked, frowning. "Why would a human do that?" By midday, the story had grown. It was no longer just gossip between guards. The tale moved through the halls like smoke, reaching workers, servants, even children of the aliens. "The human cares for her," they said. "He gave her food. He let her sleep." For a society that thrived on cruelty, where strength was measured by domination, this act was not only unusual, it was dangerous. That evening, when Ethan walked down the narrow corridor to fetch water, he could feel eyes on him. Alien figures leaned against walls, their expressions filled with sneers and disbelief. Some spat on the ground as he passed. Others laughed openly, taunting him with cruel words he didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. But one thing stood out. Their laughter was nervous. Compassion had unsettled them. When Ethan returned to his quarters, the girl looked up at him anxiously. She had heard the voices too, the cruel sounds outside the door. Her small hands gripped the blanket tightly, as if afraid they would take her away. Ethan crouched beside her, speaking softly though she couldn't understand. The words, "They won't hurt you, not while I'm here." The girl tilted her head, studying him. Slowly, she reached out, her fragile fingers brushing against his sleeve. It was the first time she had touched him willingly. The contact was brief, but it spoke volumes. She was beginning to believe. Later that night, Ethan sat in silence while the girl slept again. His thoughts were heavy. He knew compassion was not a secret that could stay hidden. Sooner or later, the overlords would notice, and when they did, they would not laugh anymore. They would punish, and he knew who they would punish first. The girl. The whispers grew louder in the following days. Some aliens gathered outside his quarters, waiting for glimpses of the human and the fragile girl. Their faces twisted in scorn. "Look at him," they sneered, feeding her like a pet. Others muttered angrily, "This is weakness. This is insult." Yet a few watched in silence, saying nothing, their expressions unreadable. Ethan noticed them. He knew not everyone mocked. Some looked thoughtful, troubled, as if his actions had stirred something buried deep within them. The girl, too, began to change. Each day she grew a little braver. She sat up straighter, ate more calmly, even dared to whisper short words to him. He couldn't understand, but he listened, nodding, letting her know her voice mattered. When she smiled faintly for the first time, small, trembling. But Relathan felt the weight of his choice deepen. She was not broken. She was healing. But the walls of the stronghold carried ears. And healing was not what the overlords wanted. One evening, Ethan was summoned. A pair of guards, larger than him and armed, barked orders for him to follow. He didn't resist. He glanced once at the girl, giving her a reassuring nod before stepping into the corridor. The door closed behind him, leaving her alone in the room. The guards led him to the great hall, where the alien leader sat on a throne of cold metal. The room was filled with others, eager to witness. The leader's sharp eyes gleamed as he leaned forward. "I hear," the leader began, his voice slow and mocking, "that you treat your toy as if she were alive." The crowd hissed and laughed, their voices echoing. Ethan stood tall, his face calm. He didn't answer immediately, which only deepened the tension. Finally, he spoke. "She is alive." A hush fell over the hall. The leader's grin sharpened into something cruel. "You think kindness makes you strong, human? No, it makes you weak. You will learn." The crowd erupted in laughter again, but beneath it, Ethan sensed danger. The leader's words weren't just insults, they were promises. When he was escorted back to his quarters, Ethan found the girl waiting anxiously, her eyes wide with fear. She rushed to him, grabbing his sleeve tightly. He placed a steady hand on her head, calming her. That night, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, Ethan sat awake, staring at the ceiling. He knew the whispers had grown into something larger. Compassion had become defiance. And defiance always carried a cost. Still, he felt no regret. The girl's faint smile, the hope in her eyes, those were worth more than safety. If the aliens wanted to break him with cruelty, they had failed. Instead, they had given him a reason to fight, and though the storm was coming, Ethan's resolve only deepened. He would protect her, no matter the price. The bond forms. The days passed slowly inside Ethan's small quarters. Outside, the whispers and sneers of the aliens grew louder. But within those four walls, a different story was unfolding. The alien girl was no longer the trembling shadow who had been thrown at his feet. She was still fragile, still wary, but something was changing, something quiet and fragile, like the first spark of fire in the cold. Ethan noticed it in small ways. At first, she had refused to meet his eyes, shrinking from his gaze. But now, when he spoke softly, her eyes would lift for a brief moment before darting away. At first, she had taken food from his hand like a starving animal, quick and desperate. Now, she accepted it with slow, careful movements, as though beginning to trust it would not be taken back. One evening, as the faint glow of the moons slipped through the cracks of the window, Ethan sat by the small fire he had built in a metal dish. The girl sat across from him on the floor, wrapped in the blanket. She watched the flames with wide eyes, the flickering light dancing in their reflection. Ethan broke a piece of dried bread in half, handing her the larger portion. She hesitated, then took it gently, her thin fingers brushing against his for the first time without fear. She chewed slowly, her small shoulders relaxing in the warmth of the fire. It was then that she spoke. Her voice was soft, broken, but filled with meaning. Words in her alien tongue slipped out in fragments, halting and unsure. Ethan couldn't understand the language, but he listened, nodding as though he could. Her hands moved as she spoke, drawing shapes in the air, pointing at scars on her arms. Clutching the pendant around her neck, Ethan leaned forward, his face calm and attentive. Though the meaning was hidden in words, the emotion was clear. She was telling him about her pain, about the things that had been done to her, about loss. At one point, her voice cracked and she looked away, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Ethan didn't push her to continue. Instead, he reached out, placing his rough hand gently over hers. She froze for a moment, then slowly allowed it. For the first time, she did not pull away. That night, she slept not curled into a tight ball of fear, but stretched out, her small hand clutching the edge of his sleeve as though to keep him near. Ethan sat awake long after she closed her eyes, staring at her fragile form. He understood nothing of her language, but he understood the truth. She was beginning to trust him, and trust, in a place ruled by cruelty, was a dangerous, beautiful thing. The next day, Ethan tried something new. Using small objects from the room, he attempted to build a bridge of communication. He placed a cup on the table and pointed at it. "Cup," he said firmly. The girl tilted her head, watching him carefully. After a long pause, she whispered something in her own tongue. Her voice was hesitant, as though unused to teaching. Ethan nodded, repeating the strange word she had said. She blinked in surprise, then whispered it again, slower. They spent hours like this, object after object, gesture after gesture. Ethan spoke his word, and she gave hers. Slowly, the gap between them narrowed. By evening, the girl smiled faintly when he clumsily repeated one of her words with the wrong tone. She even laughed once, a small, fragile laugh that ended too quickly, but was enough to make Ethan's chest tighten. That laugh was proof of comfort. That laugh was proof of life. By the third night, she began whispering more freely. Though Ethan could only catch fragments, her tone told him much. She spoke of her family, perhaps gesturing to the stars with a longing look. She touched her chest when she spoke of someone, maybe a mother or father. Then her expression darkened, and she touched the scars on her arm. Her voice lowered, trembling. Ethan's fists clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "No more," he said quietly. "No one will hurt you again." She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to understand the tone. She leaned closer, her forehead pressing gently against his arm for a moment before she pulled away, embarrassed by her own courage. But Ethan did not move. He allowed it, and that small act of comfort sank deep into her heart. Outside, however, things grew more dangerous. The whispers of compassion had turned into talk of rebellion. Some aliens spat whenever Ethan passed, their hatred clear. Others looked at him with suspicion, as if waiting for him to slip, to prove that humans were as cruel as they claimed. But a few, just a few, watched him differently. Their eyes lingered longer. Their expressions softened for a brief second before hardening again. Ethan noticed. He knew some of them were thinking the same thing he was. Kindness was not weakness. Kindness was strength. Inside his quarters, the girl was changing too. No longer a trembling shadow, she began to help in small ways. She folded the blanket neatly when she woke. She fetched water with him, always staying close but no longer hiding behind him. She even placed half her bread back into his hand once, insisting he eat. Each gesture was small, but together they built something larger, a bond neither of them could deny. One night, as rain lashed against the stronghold walls, the girl whispered a new word to him. She touched her chest and said it again. Slower, Ethan frowned, repeating it clumsily. She shook her head, then touched her chest again. Then he understood. It was her name. He said it again, carefully this time. Her eyes widened. And for the first time, her smile was full, not faint, not trembling, but real. Her name. She had trusted him with her name. From that moment, the bond was sealed. Ethan sat in silence after she fell asleep, his heart heavy with realization. She was no longer just someone to protect out of duty. She was someone he cared for, someone whose trust meant more to him than his own life. And though the storm outside was growing, inside that small room, a fragile light had been lit, a light that no cruelty could extinguish. The growing threat, the bond between Ethan and the alien girl, grew stronger with each passing day. But outside his small quarters, the air was changing. The stronghold's corridors carried more than just whispers. Now they carried hostility. The story of the human who defied cruelty was no longer gossip. It had become a problem. At first, the aliens had laughed at him, treating his kindness like weakness. But now, their laughter was sharper, edged with anger. For a society that thrived on power and dominance, Ethan's quiet defiance was dangerous. It was not just an insult to their pride, it was a challenge to their entire way of life. One morning, when Ethan stepped out to fetch water, he noticed the difference. The halls were not filled with casual sneers anymore. Instead, the guards' eyes followed him like predators watching prey. One deliberately bumped into him, snarling something. In their guttural tongue, another spat at his feet. Ethan said nothing, but his hand tightened on the water jug. When he returned to his quarters, the girl was waiting by the door, her small body tense with worry. She had heard the hostility outside. She clung to his sleeve, her wide eyes filled with unspoken fear. Ethan knelt, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said, though he knew it was a lie. "I won't let them take you." That night, the change became even clearer. The alien leader summoned his council. In the great hall, their voices echoed in anger. "The human shames us," one snarled. "He refuses our gift," another spat. "He treats her like she has worth." The leader's eyes narrowed, glowing in the firelight. "This ends soon," he said coldly. "Compassion is poison. If the others see it as strength, it will spread. We will not allow that." There were murmurs of agreement, though a few shifted uncomfortably, their faces uncertain. But none dared to speak against the leader. By the time Ethan returned from the council's summons, the threat was clear. The overlords were watching more closely now. Guards lingered outside his quarters, their hands on their weapons, their eyes sharp. The girl noticed them too. Each time she peeked out the door, she would quickly retreat. Pressing herself into the safety of the room, her fragile peace was breaking. Despite the growing danger, Ethan continued to care for her. He knew every gesture of kindness now came with risk, but he could not stop. Each night, he trained her in small ways, teaching her to stay calm, to listen for danger, to hide quickly. It wasn't much, but it was something. One evening, as he showed her how to move silently across the room, she looked up at him and whispered her name again. He repeated it back to her, and she smiled softly. Then, with hesitant courage, she touched his chest and whispered a word. Ethan frowned, repeating it clumsily. She shook her head, then tried again, pointing at him. Slowly, he understood. Was the word she used for him, a name she had given him. For the first time since his capture, Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest. She had given him more than trust, she had given him a place in her world. But the moment was cut short. A loud crash echoed from the corridor outside. Voices shouted in the alien tongue, harsh and angry. The girl froze, her small body trembling. Ethan quickly doused the fire, plunging the room into shadows. He placed a finger to his lips, motioning. For silence, the voices outside grew louder. Heavy footsteps stopped at his door. Then, after a tense pause, they moved on. The girl's hands clutched his sleeve so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Ethan placed his arm around her shoulders, steadying her. "They won't take you," he whispered. "Not while I live, but." The truth was unavoidable. They would come for her. The next day, a messenger delivered food rations, but his eyes lingered on the girl too long. Ethan felt the threat in that stare. He stood between them until the door closed, his jaw tight. Later, as the girl rested, Ethan sat at the table, staring at his old weapon. It had been given back to him as part of the gift, a cruel joke. Now, it lay across the table like a promise. He cleaned it carefully, each motion slow and deliberate. The girl woke and watched him silently. She did not flinch at the weapon. Now, instead, she reached out, touching his arm lightly, as if to ask, "Are we ready?" Ethan met her gaze. "Soon," he said quietly. By the end of the week, rumors spread faster than ever. Some claimed the human was raising the girl as a daughter. Others said he was planning rebellion. A few even whispered admiration, though always in secret. The leader heard them all. His patience ended. "Enough," he growled to his council. "If the human refuses to break her, then we will break him, and we will start by taking her back." The council agreed, their voices echoing in the great hall. That night, Ethan felt the shift in the air. The stronghold was too quiet, the halls too still. He sat awake by the cot, watching the girl as she slept. He could not shake the feeling that time was running out. He leaned forward, speaking softly to the sleeping girl. "They'll come for you soon," he whispered. "But I'll be ready. I promise you, I won't let them win." The girl stirred slightly, her hand reaching out in her sleep until it rested against his arm. Ethan covered her hand with his resolve hardening. The threat was no longer distant. It was here, pressing against the walls, ready to strike. And Ethan knew, when they came, he would not hide. He would fight, no matter the cost. The Defiance storm broke without warning. It was late at night when the stronghold's silence shattered. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridors, followed by the metallic clang of weapons and the guttural shouts of alien soldiers. The girl woke with a start, her eyes wide, her body trembling. Ethan was already on his feet. He had felt it coming for days, the calm before the inevitable strike. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her close, crouching low. Her hands clutched his shirt tightly, her small frame shaking against him. "They're here," he whispered, his voice low but steady. "But you are not alone. Not tonight. Not ever." The door shook violently as something slammed against it. The iron hinges groaned, dust falling from the frame. The girl whimpered softly, burying her face against his chest. Ethan tightened his hold, his heart steady, his resolve unshakable. The second crash against the door was louder. The wood cracked, splinters scattering across the floor. Shadows moved outside, dark shapes illuminated by the faint torchlight of the hall. Ethan set the girl down gently on the cot. "Hide," he whispered, motioning toward the corner behind the table. She shook her head violently, tears streaking her face. She didn't want to leave him. He crouched low, pressing his forehead briefly against hers. "Trust me," he said. Firmly, his voice carried no fear, only certainty. "I'll protect you." After a long hesitation, she crawled toward the corner, pressing herself into the shadows. Her wide eyes never left him. The door burst open. 3 alien guards stormed inside, their weapons gleaming, their twisted faces full of rage. Behind them, the sound of more boots echoed in the hallway back up, waiting if needed. The lead guard sneered, his sharp teeth flashing. "The girl belongs to us," he growled in their tongue. Even without translation, Ethan understood. Ethan stood tall, his weapon in hand. His face was calm, his posture unyielding. "No," he said simply. The guards laughed harshly, their guttural voices dripping with mockery. To them, he was just one human against an empire. But Ethan did not waver. The first guard lunged. Ethan moved like lightning, sidestepping and striking hard with the butt of his weapon. The alien stumbled, roaring in anger, but Ethan didn't stop. He swung again, this time knocking the creature to the ground. The second rushed forward, blade raised. Ethan blocked, the clash of steel ringing through the room. He shoved hard, forcing the alien back, then struck low, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The girl's eyes widened in the shadows, her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she saw the human not just as a protector, but as a warrior. The third guard hesitated, then barked something into the hall. More footsteps thundered closer. Ethan knew the room would soon flood with enemies, but his resolve burned brighter. The girl would not be taken. With a roar, he charged forward, slamming into the third guard. They crashed into the wall, the impact rattling the thin boards. Ethan's weapon pinned the alien down, his eyes blazing with fury. "You'll never touch her again," he growled, even if they could not understand his words. The first guard staggered back to his feet, blood dripping from his jaw. Together, they circled him, snarling. Ethan's chest heaved, his muscles tense, but he stood ready. Outside, more soldiers waited. He could hear them shifting, restless, eager to break through. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but retreat was not an option. The doorframe shook again as reinforcements pushed forward. Ethan took a step back, placing himself firmly between the girl and the doorway. His stance was defiant, his shadow cast across her trembling form. For a moment, the hall went quiet. Then, slowly, the crowd of soldiers parted. The alien leader stepped inside. His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement, his smile sharp. He looked from Ethan to the girl, then back again. "You think you can protect her?" he said mockingly in broken human speech. His voice carried the weight of command, every syllable dripping with contempt. Ethan didn't answer with words. He lifted his weapon, his silence speaking louder than any threat. The leader chuckled darkly. "Foolish human. Compassion makes you weak. Tonight, you die with her." The soldiers surged forward at his command. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan fought like a man possessed, every strike driven not by anger, but by purpose. He was not fighting for himself, he was fighting for her. For the fragile life that had been handed to him as a cruel joke, but had become something worth more than his own survival. His weapon cracked against skulls. His fist struck with bone-breaking force. Every time he was knocked back, he rose. Again. Every cut, every bruise, every drop of blood only hardened his resolve. The girl watched from the corner, her small hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to run to him, but fear held her still. Yet in her heart, something burned, something stronger than fear. Hope. Ethan's body ached, his breath ragged, but his spirit did not falter. One by one, guards fell, groaning and broken, but more poured in, endless as a tide dot. At last, he was forced to his knees. Blood dripped from a wound across his forehead, his hands trembling as he gripped his weapon. The leader stepped forward, sneering. Pathetic, he spat. You could have lived if you had obeyed. But now you'll die for nothing. Ethan lifted his head slowly, his eyes blazing even through the pain. Not nothing, he said, his voice low but unshaken. He glanced back at the girl, still hidden in the shadows. For her. The leader's sneer faltered for just a moment before he could strike. Ethan surged forward one last time, slamming into him with all the strength he had left. They crashed to the ground, the leader roaring in fury as Ethan's hands closed. Around his throat, the room erupted with chaos. Soldiers shouting, weapons clashing. But through it all, Ethan's defiance burned like fire. He would not surrender, not while she still breathed. That night, the stronghold shook with the echoes of his stand. The aliens had expected him to break. Instead, they had found a man willing to fight an army for a girl they thought worthless, and though the battle was not yet over, one truth had already been written in blood and fire. The human would rather die on his feet than let them take her.